I put so much pressure on myself to like, I have to save the world, just like really grandiose, problematic. And what I realize is you just have to know what you're really curious about and what the right next step is. And the right next step is not going to be the career you're in for 40 years or something like that, but you have to be able to say, I feel called to this. Like this is interesting. And the next step is going to help me explore that in some way.
Welcome to the STEM Career Coach, hosted by Donnie Maclary. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, this is your guide to growing in STEM.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this episode of the STEM Career Coach. It's Data Science Donnie here, and I'm joined by a special guest, Max Klau, who has recently released Developing Servant Leaders at Scale, and how to do it and why it matters. Max, why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me here. I'm glad to be here talking with you. So my name is Dr. Max Klau. I'm the founder of the Center for Courageous Wholeness, which is an organization that is focused on helping purpose-driven individuals and organizations serve others, confront their shadow, and scale inner development. And I came to this, for the last 7 years, I was the chief program officer of an organization called the New Politics Leadership Academy, which was here in the United States, working to bring more servant leaders into American politics. And that means military vets or people who've done national service programs like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps. And we recently opened it up to people who have chosen careers in education or healthcare, just people who have clearly made it clear through their life choices that they are oriented towards serving others. And we just think we need a lot more of those folks in our politics. And before that, I was 10 years at an AmeriCorps program called City Year, which was young adults doing a year of service, all in high need schools, supporting students to stay on track to graduate. And while I was there, I spent years figuring out how do you build an organization-wide capacity to invite people to focus on their own inner development while they're really immersed in these really intense service experiences focused on serving others. And that's really what the book is about, is what the process was like to find a way to do that, and then how the final model turned out. And before that, I was getting a doctorate at the ed school at Harvard with a real focus on adaptive leadership and human development. So these themes of leadership development and service have just been the kind of twin themes.
Absolutely. You had me at, U.S. military, medical. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I was a combat paramedic as well. And I would say definitely in today's day and age, we do need more selfless leaders, in my opinion. And most importantly, people that are seeing the greater good and making some of those, difficult decisions, that not everyone, would like to do. It is not easy being a leader, that's for sure.
The military is 1% of our citizenry does the military.
Sir.
It's a pretty special crew that is willing to make that
quite proud
and then learn from that life experience about serving a cause larger than self.
For me, it's followed me everywhere. If I'm honest with you, I got out in 2016, essentially it was 10 years ago, scary to say, and it's stayed with me ever since I've been a civilian and grown my career. And it's also something that's helped me stand out as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, the New Politics was about getting more folks like you to step up and
I'm glad
enter the arena.
Well, it seems like you've spent several years, I would say, preparing for this book, and really kind of, adding to those case studies and different examples and different, I would say, tweaks of the model, of what you've essentially created. What helped you or inspired you to really, pull the trigger and say that, I'm going to write a book, and where, it's not an easy task for sure. But I'm curious to see, what pushed you to ultimately, put that hard work and put everything together for all of us.
Yeah, the book is really my life's work. This was, in a meaningful sense, it was work that began 30 years ago when I did my first service program. I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. The only thing I was clear of when I graduated college was I wanted to find a way to serve. And for me, it was kind of, civilian service. I did a year-long service program in Israel, tutoring kids and running after-school programs. And the book is really what unfolded from that decision to do service, and then explored leadership from an academic perspective. And I really felt like it took years to build something that worked. and that was able to do this kind of deep inner work at scale. And it just felt like it's time to share it with the world and tell the story so that more people can understand it.
I love it. I love it. Now, you've said that, developing servant leaders requires inner work. Uh, you know, how does listening more than speaking play into that transformation?
Well, the essence of servant leadership
Hmm.
is you are focused on the growth and development of others. Right? I mean, the key idea that kind of the modern incarnation of servant leadership came from Robert Greenleaf, who was a corporate executive who wrote about this in the 70s. And his thing was the big test of a servant leader is whether those served learn and grow as human beings. And do they become more able to find their way forward? And are they healthier and stronger and more able to become servant leaders themselves?
Hmm.
And that is very different from people who seek leadership to feed their own hungers for power or control or
Hmm.
greed or whatever it is. So, you know, servant leadership is fundamentally about being focused on somebody else and their own growth and development. And it is literally impossible to really be effective at that if you are not deeply listening to where somebody else is at and what they're thinking about, what their learning edge is, that sort of thing. So it's just a deep orientation to really be focused on somebody else rather than yourself.
Absolutely. And for me, I would say I truly became, just for me personally, a great leader, or, making strides towards really understanding what a leader is when I became a father. When I
Yeah.
became a dad, that really transformed really my own view of myself and,
Yeah.
what really matters and who really matters. And I guess some of the cultures that I've been the most proud of helping to create have been ones surrounded by what do people actually want? And we're not talking about professionally, we're talking about personally as well.
Yeah.
We, of course, in work, we would love to be lucky enough to do something that gives us that passion and that drive. But
Yeah.
ultimately, we work to provide for our families, to take care of our loved
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
And, if we can sync those two up, typically you're much happier, you're much more in line, you feel like your life is much more balanced. But it
Yeah.
does take a leader to ask those questions, to listen to individuals, and, most importantly, remember, maybe take notes and pay attention, and not just, in one ear and out the other, and then put
Yeah.
some proof in the pudding, as a lot of my bosses have said. Then from there, you take those steps to really, prove, and actions speak louder than words. And that's something I've always resonated with in the military. You lead by example, you lead
Oh
from the
yeah.
front. And
Yeah.
that is something I've always quoted as I've become a leader. And, something I have learned is the more, I guess, passionate I become about other people, the less I speak.
Oh
And the
yeah.
more solutioning I become. It's almost like, okay, this is a creative problem. How can we tackle this together?
Yep.
Opposed to, do what I say. This is what I do,
Oh yeah.
and just, kind of barking commands, which we do find in the military as well. as you, as you can imagine.
Yep.
And I'm very curious of how how you talk about guiding individuals through this inner development and confronting their shadow. What does this look like in practice?
Yeah. So this idea of shadow is really powerful. It's very influenced by Carl Jung, the psychologist who wrote a lot about the shadow. And his idea is all of us have it. Light and shadow always go together. And
Really?
all of us have this kind of idealized vision of who we are. We have this idealized view of I'm kind or I'm courageous or it's all stuff we like and we're proud of and is socially acceptable. But all of us also have parts of ourselves that we're not proud of or that are not socially acceptable for some reason and we shove them away into our subconscious. We move it out of our conscious mind into what
Mhm.
Jung calls the shadow. But it doesn't just go away there. It actually influences us powerfully beyond our awareness. And so Carl Jung says the work for anybody who wants to kind of achieve their full potential is to become whole by confronting their shadow, by taking a look, turning inwards to face the parts of ourselves
Mhm.
that we really don't like, you know? Um, and that is some very deep work and it lives a lot. There's a lot of therapists who do this. There's a lot of, personal growth experiences you can do. I've tried to way to frame this in a way that's kind of calibrated for the workplace where you
Mhm.
can get some of this deep work, but also in a way that is, appropriate for a conference room on a Monday afternoon. Yeah. And so, I mean, to get concrete, we invite people to do two exercises. The first is a personal leadership mission statement, which a lot of
Mhm.
people have been asked to do at some point in their life. What are your highest aspirations for yourself, and put some words and clarity to that.
Mm.
But the piece that we do that is pretty unusual, I've realized, is asking people to craft their related shadow mission. And their
Mm.
shadow is, how are you being when you are not living with integrity to your mission?
Mm.
And it's really uncomfortable to look
I
at.
bet.
If we have a
Absolutely.
mission to be courageous, our shadow is to be cowardly. If we have a mission to spread love in the world, our shadow would be to withhold love. And it's often just really
Understanding.
uncomfortable. Say again?
I would say understanding, using that
Yeah.
information. And, I would say the more uncomfortable it is, probably the better the results, or the more
Well, it
truthful
means
the
the more
results.
courageous, right? The more
Yeah.
courageous you've been at like looking right at it. And Carl Jung says, when we make it conscious, we have more choice to not go to
Mm.
that. The more conscious we are of our shadow, the more we have power to not let it, control our behavior. You know,
Absolutely.
so that's what we do. But a lot of people, what I found is a lot of people have really never been asked to do it, and
Hmm.
um, and it's uncomfortable for anybody. So
Yeah, I can only imagine. One of the
yeah,
things I started doing as I started growing in leadership is really honing on what I don't want to become. It's
yeah,
very easy to realize through your leaders and different touch points of what you don't want to be more than you do want to be. And I almost use that as reverse engineering. I knew
yeah,
I didn't want to be someone that told people what to do. I knew I didn't want to be someone that wasn't approachable, didn't actually show genuine care or interest in those around them. And those were things, of course, I took from different leaders that maybe I didn't agree with their philosophies. And I really tried to, have conversations almost with myself, that said, how can we put this into practice? It's not just,
yeah,
okay, I don't want to be a boss that dictates. Okay, well, how can I make sure that, I'm not a dictator? You enable.
yeah,
How can I enable people around me? Okay, come up with ideas. You have to be in leadership, in my opinion, you really have to be very passionate and very cognizant of, how you're leading others and how that's being received versus what you thought would happen. And I
yeah,
think pulling back those onions and really seeing that other side of yourself, and just, to me, knowledge is power. And knowing that side of you is almost just as powerful as not doing anything about it, because you are aware that this is what you tend to do. This might be your default setting, shall we call it, in certain scenarios, and you can do something about it. If okay, I normally react like this. Okay, but I don't want to react like this. Let's, pivot from that.
yep, yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm sure that that is probably some of the bits that you see that kind of start linking the pieces for people
Yeah, and
working with.
that idea that I need to turn and work with the parts of myself that I'm not proud of and that I don't want to be. That's a kind of a deep consciousness shift for folks.
Yeah, and it's well, I'm glad that you are helping individuals, kind of find that aspect of themselves and bring out, their best selves. And the only person that is the most truthful to you is you.
Yeah,
And that is, I think, the biggest bit. You need to buy in yourself and almost have that kind of, I would say, consciousness. I would assume, with what you've seen, and I guess some of the individuals you've been able to help.
yeah. There's one story I like to tell of at New Politics. We have a lot of pretty amazing people who come through our programs.
I'm sure, especially the
Um,
care.
and one really stood out. He had been West Point grad,
Oh wow,
elite special forces for many
wow.
years. When we encountered him, he was getting his master's at an Ivy League university. Exceptional
Stuff.
person who was thinking about
Yeah,
running for Congress, and had the credentials and the
absolutely.
background and the network to possibly be a
Mhm.
viable candidate. And he did this, and he was just very contemplative afterwards, and was like, "I've never been asked to think about this, and my
Mhm.
shadow mission is every politician I hate." And when you think about people, who have a viable path to having that kind of power, who have
Yeah,
never even been thought about this, and like, what does it
yeah.
mean to hold power with that? And also the fact that somebody could go through some of America's most powerful kind of character shaping institutions, and it's not something that is discussed so much.
Oh,
I
I can
think,
only imagine the military. We're very mission oriented.
Right.
And there's no
Right.
room for doubt in missions. There's no room for doubt. And, when you're being told this is how you execute something, especially, when it comes to special operations and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Yep.
it's fantastic that he kind of is able to see that that is how he has been groomed, from military,
Yep.
university all the way into the military. I'm not
Yep.
surprised. But it's great to see that, especially when it shifts from politics, which we do need people that are free thinkers. We do need people that are going to, maybe question the status quo.
Yep.
And I'm really hoping from just the background you shared that this person has been really able to kind of bring out both sides of the coin, because there's room for both aspects or parts of the process. And I'm sure it was quite shocking for that individual just to be like, wow, I do see things much differently.
Yeah, and the shift from like I'm the good guy, I just got to go beat up the bad guys to I have I have
Parts of
darkness
life.
within myself that I need to be working with. That's kind of the key paradigm shift that this work is about, and it's just powerful I think it's important for anybody, and
Yeah,
especially somebody who is seeking and possibly attaining power, because power has a dark side and can corrupt us, and we
yes,
need
sir.
to more conscious we are of this, the more we can be with power without kind of becoming somebody we don't want to be.
Absolutely. And, I'm sure there's been some challenges you face across, I believe you said seven
Yep.
years that you've been really diving into this. Could you share some of those challenges that you found in like scaling this model in your role as a leader in various organizations?
Well, it's the reason I wrote the book is
Mm.
because you know I got to City Year, which when I got to City Year was already 18 years old, and it had about 1,500 core members,
Mhm.
18 to 24-year-olds who were in 15 different cities. So it was already a big organization.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
just
for
felt
sure.
like the thing it didn't have that I wanted to contribute was a really powerful kind of reflection, inner development experience. And as I say in the book, I just didn't know how to do it at that kind of scale. And what followed was years and years of like trial and error and failure. Uh, you know, the first thing was I just kept saying you can't develop leaders without reflection. We need to open up some time, and everyone was like, "We're too busy." Like, yes, reflection. It's really nice, but we're just way too much to do, and we quickly proved that wrong. Uh, we were able to find an hour every other week for them to kind of stop doing their work and think about
Mhm.
things, and then everybody hated it. It turns out that it was really hard to know what to talk about, and people ended up just going to this place of venting and complaining, and people are like, "This is
Mhm.
horrible. You're destroying my idealism. Why are we doing this?" You know? So we found out you can't just open up a space. There's some real complexity here. So how do we help people show up with questions that are really powerful? How do we frame the work so that they see the connection between turning inwards and the impact that they have? Because for a lot
Mhm.
of people, it's not. So it was just like challenge after challenge after challenge. And in an organization of that size, there are skeptics and cynics and people who are
Of
like,
course.
it is not your job to tell me to reflect. And how do you deal with that energy when these spaces are really fragile? So there were a lot of challenges, and that's exactly what I wrote the book for, to help people understand. Like, this is what happens if you try and do it, and here's a way past all of those obstacles so that you can get to something that works.
I also love that it really personalizes the journey. When you put it in book form, it's something that's a bit of an intimate,
Yeah,
encounter.
yeah,
And I think that is probably the easiest route, probably just from as you're explaining to buy-in. The more buy-in you get from yourself and just, that I want to make these changes. Okay, I do see some value there, or at least that genuine curiosity, and then from there, you can really expand on that to something that potentially could be groundbreaking. But you do have to take that first step. You do have to listen to that first, or if you're listening to the book or if you're reading it, you do have to dive into that first chapter and really kind of put yourself out there. Vulnerability, I'm pretty sure, is a pretty important aspect of this process.
yeah. And one of the most gratifying bits of feedback, a lot of people who read the book are like, I can't believe how honest you were about how little you knew how to do
I love
this,
it.
and how much went wrong along the way. And I kind of wrote it. I wanted people to experience the journey I went
Mhm.
on, just facing these obstacles and not knowing how to get past it, and then figuring it out.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I'm excited. Now, for someone just beginning their, journey into leadership, what does it mean, to be a servant leader, and why should they care? I think this new generation of leaders, are very crucial in the future and what we're trying to build as a society, and most importantly in cultures and positive environments. Uh, so I would love to, ask some advice or maybe some tidbits that you would, share with, some entry level or people that want to be future leaders, and how they can, be a part of the good.
It's interesting. I mean, there
That challenge
a
you a
lot of my
bit.
work. Well, a lot of my work is grounded in this understanding of we all live in two worlds: the
Mhm.
the inner world of our own awareness, and then the outer world of kind of participating in the moment in time that
Yes,
we're
sir.
in. And when you turn and look in the inner world, we're suddenly in the landscape of mythology and religion and psychology,
Okay.
like the whole inner world of a human being. And what I have learned over time is every wisdom tradition around the world says that the most evolved place you can get to is to be in service to others, and whether that's Jesus caring for the least among us, or Moses, defending the oppressed slave, or Buddha's compassion for the sick and dying, like everywhere in wisdom traditions, East and West, it says the highest level of development you can get to is to be in service to others. And I actually think when you are busy trying to tend to your ego, you just
Mhm.
suffer. Like it's just spiritually painful because you can never fully make the ego happy. It is never satisfied.
For
So
sure.
there's the spiritual question of just how do I want to be in the world with this life? And then
Mhm.
you look in the outside world and it's a mess. The world is falling apart. Like we have a lot
Correct.
of problems. We have a lot
That's
of
the last
crises
few days, man.
and we need as many people as possible to step up and say, I'm going to try and be of service. Um, and, not just try and feed my own personal hungers for comfort
Mhm.
or, attention or whatever it is. I want to live a life that actually makes a positive difference in, whatever small way I can. And that's where this book is about, where that kind of spiritual evolution meets the needs of
Mhm.
the world to have a whole lot of people showing up that way.
Yeah, true. And I would say, just to circle back to the question a little bit, why they should care is because the world needs them to. We need
Yeah.
more people that can put others first, more people that can be an example of how you can be a genuine person. We're not just talking about leaders. I feel like we're also talking about people characteristics and morals and values. And we need more people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
uh, are willing to do things for the greater good. They're willing to. It's not easy to be a leader. It's not easy because it takes up time. It takes up a lot of extra, there's a lot of weekends involved. But to counteract that and to kind of make it worth it is, if you care about those individuals, if you care about being a good leader, building the culture that you always wanted to be a part of,
Yep.
typically you don't think twice. And that's kind of, that's really kind of, as of right now, as a father, if my son needs me for anything, I instantly go tend to him. If one of my staff says, hey, something happened, I instantly pick up the phone and just say, okay, what happened? What can we do? You need that kind of, I would say, best practices, or make it, almost habit forming. And that is essentially what your book is really help create these habits, help dispel some mythologies when it comes to why you should or shouldn't do something.
Yep.
And to me, that is all of the reasons why, future leaders need to start caring about, those around them. And most importantly, I think it will translate outside of the workplace as well, which isn't a
Yep.
bad thing. Uh,
Yep.
I am curious, let's say, for example, you're a young professional and they're looking to begin their journey without formal leadership training. What are some steps they can take, or some things that they can do to maybe start heading in that direction and start, analyzing themselves?
Well, I've done a lot of work with kind of emerging adults, young adults. AmeriCorps City Year was
Love
all
it.
kind of 18 to 24-year-olds, folks who are just getting
Foreign
started.
demographic.
It's an age group I love, I think, because I had such trouble finding my own way. But I do think it's important to start with trying to craft your own leadership mission and your own
Mhm.
shadow. It starts with that inner sense. And I will say, I have on my website, the Courageous Wholeness Center for Courageous Wholeness.org, I have a free download that's a workbook with those exercises. I also have a digital offering that's me guiding people through those
Awesome.
exercises. So if you're looking for a little support around that, but I often say I was a lost idealist in my 20s. I just had this real passion to do good and didn't know what to do with it. And what I learned was I kept facing these choice points, and everybody around me had opinions, but I just had to go inside and say, what do I care most about? and what of these choices is most aligned with who I am. And
Mhm.
I just wish somebody had been a little stronger with me about, you have to turn inwards and do that inner work to get clear, because that inner compass is what guides you to your destiny.
Yeah.
But it's some work. You got to take some work. You got to take some time and do the challenging work to put words to it, to get clear about it. What is really that inner truth? So start there.
I think it's just asking, just to me, obviously, I'm just a aspiring leader myself, but, asking those hard questions and just really thinking about the type of person you would want to be as your boss, or
Mm.
the leaders
Yep.
around you,
Yep.
or, how you would want to be treated in certain scenarios. Even I actually emphasize that the most in difficult discussions. I'm in we're a recruitment firm. It's a very sales, we're a very relationship driven business, and things happen and stuff gets missed. But,
Yep.
how I respond to those scenarios, it could be two very different, categories. I could get angry, I could get frustrated, I could, berate this person and make an example out of them, or this
Mhm.
can be a teaching point. This is, we can have some corrective behaviors and we can make sure this doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, there are a lot of leaders that have, the more negative outlook. But I've found, but it took me maybe having those discussions or being the recipient of those discussions to make it such an area of emphasis, so that as I grow my career, I make sure I stop that bullet. There's a saying in the Army, that, shit rolls downhill, pardon my French, and to me, the best leaders stop it. It stops with you. You digest all of the chaos and all of the, I
Yep.
guess, the situation around you, and then you come up and formulate a plan to get the best out of everyone. And
Yep.
typically the best isn't being angry, getting everyone, to be on the defensive. And I love the areas in which you have really been working in, politics, healthcare, military. These are very important sectors that we, as Americans, have seen a lot of struggle. And
Oh
I
yeah.
think the more people that
Yeah.
we have, regardless of which side of view you have, it could be very, very important to at least, be able to have those conversations and respect one another. Uh, I
Amen.
would love to know a bit about, some of your personal journey, in writing this book. What has it taught you about your own leadership? I'm sure you've learned so much about yourself, through this process, mate.
That's a great question. Um, the book tells the story of years of trial and error to
Hmm.
develop this model, but then getting the book out into the world, also, I hit brick walls all the time. I got an agent and sent it out like to 30 different publishers. They all said no. And part of the journey was, I'd written the book, and then I talked to an agent, and it was during COVID, and they were like, "You have to reframe this as kind of a response to the Great Resignation," which is not. It was not honest to the book, but I had like kind of gave it a new title and gave it a new introductory chapter to kind of frame it.
Yeah.
Nobody accepted it.
Mm-mm.
Um, and then, this was after, like, the agent was like, I failed you. Like, I've sent this to everybody I know. I'm
Mm-mm.
sorry, I can't help you anymore. And I was like, I have to turn this into the most honest
Yeah.
book I can, which I've spent my life developing servant leaders. This is going to be a book about
What better
developing
way?
servant. Yeah.
Just
Right. And that was when the book got out in the world. And I just learned,
stay
you know,
true, mate.
yeah, you have to be, you have to have integrity, you know? And
Yes, I do.
when I experimented with trying to fit myself to be attractive to the market, it failed. So that was an important learning.
And I think it just is a testament to the whole reason the book has, come out in the first place. And I'm not surprised. If I'm honest with you, the way you told that story, I was like, seems like it would make sense, especially for the topic and the theme and just exactly what this book is be a testament to yourself, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And whoever that is. You need to make yourself proud, and when you are a proud person and a proud leader, that is going to spill over to every aspect of your life. And I'm glad to hear that as well, because there's a lot of people who have great messages and great ideas and ways to help individuals, and they would have let that almost door shut and potentially been
Yep.
frustrated and be like, okay, maybe my timing's not now, but resiliency and the tenacity, showed through.
Yep.
And that's exactly why we're, speaking today. And I'm really, really thankful as well. Now, last bit from me, which is probably,
Yep.
I've asked a few good questions, but I really, this one is probably the most important. What advice would you give young professionals who want to lead with purpose and impact?
Two pieces. Well, I guess a few things. First is take some time to do this inner clarity, like craft your mission and your shadow and make it a consistent practice to check in with that. And whether it's journaling or talking to a close friend or meditation, but um, tending to your inner life is essential, especially in a world that is, there are all these folks who are desperate for your attention and to keep your eyes, keep your head anywhere but on
Mhm.
what is most important to you, you know? And also I put so much pressure on myself to like, I have to save the world, just like
Okay.
really grandiose, problematic. And what I realize is you just have to know what you're really curious about and what the right next step is. And the right next step is not going to be the career you're in for 40 years or something like that, but you have to be able to say, I feel called to this. Like this is interesting. And the next step is going to help me explore that in some way, you know?
Mhm.
And in my early 20s, I kept making the wrong decision. I would try things and very quickly realize I've tried this. This is not the path for
Learning
me.
some lessons,
Like
mate.
it was a no. And while I was living it, I was like, this is so hard. I made a mistake. I screwed up. But in hindsight, I'm like, I had good reasons for wanting to try that. And it was good learning. And every time I learned that that's not the path, I was like, all right, I'm getting closer.
Adjust.
So
Yeah.
this pay attention to your inner life, stay curious, and just do the right next thing that is, a step in a direction towards something that is of interest to you. And over time, that gets you to the life you're supposed to be living.
Absolutely. I think, just a few points that you said there, just to emphasize a bit, is really just figuring out, taking that step, writing it down. It's not just some idea that you have when you're bored and, just, scrolling or on a taxi or whatever. No, you want to put pen to paper or computer to, typing. You really want to try and see what that looks like. And, and I encourage individuals to print that out, place it everywhere.
Yep.
All the reminders that we have of who we want to be, the better. And just taking steps, being vulnerable, being, like you mentioned, and I think it was just absolutely needed to be emphasized, is we are going to make mistakes.
Oh yeah.
Mistakes are going to happen. And that's actually a good thing, in my opinion, because we need to learn from them. Don't see them as walls that are just never going to be broken down. As, okay, we tried it this way. As you very appropriately said, I did this for a reason. This is the reason it didn't work out. So let's adjust fire, as they say in the military. And then from there, we do a workaround. And this is a constant thing. This isn't a one
Yeah.
size
Never
fits
ends.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 years from now, you'll be a different version of the leader, and your mission statement will change, and everything about you will be very different. And that's a part of the journey. Embrace that. We want to see, progressions, but most importantly, it comes from within. And I very much encourage, leaders that are already leading, people that want to become a leader or just a good person, developing servant leaders at scale and how to do it and why it matters could be something that could, really help you take those strides. And as you mentioned, and we will also share in the episode details, some of those links for some of those free materials to start
Yeah.
taking those steps. And, the world is going to be a much better place when we've got more leaders that care, more servant leaders, and most importantly, more people willing to be vulnerable and try to do something for themselves. And I do apologize. I didn't say Dr. Max Klau. So
No
I do
worries. No
apologize
worries.
for that, mate.
All good. All
But
good.
it has been an
Yep.
absolute pleasure, mate. I really appreciate your vulnerability, that you've really harped on, what the journey has been. And I'm so glad that you, didn't stick with the great
The great
resignation
resignation.
at the
It
beginning.
wasn't
Yeah,
meant to be.
exactly, mate.
Yep.
And you went
Yep.
back to the true blue and what you were doing. And this is why your book was released a few weeks ago. And
Yep.
I'm very much looking forward to, getting a copy and learn a few bits myself. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
your time.
Awesome. Awesome. Pleasure chatting with you. Be well.
Thank you for listening to the STEM Career Coach with Donnie Maclary. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more inspiring stories and actionable tips. Catch you next time.